Welcome to Qt Widgets and More. In today's episode, we will look at a special combo box. One where you can type using regular ASCII so that you can see or type names like those that are on the screen right now. So in KDAP, we employ people from all over the world, and some of them have names that have special characters in them. What you see here right now is Lukasz Tinkl. I think it's pronounced correct. I hope, at least. And if you're on a smartphone, maybe I can just zoom it out here now. Then you can see that there is a apostrophe, I don't know what's called, on top of the A. And if I'm typing that in a search field, obviously, if I just do string matching, then a regular A, let me just type here, Luke, and you can see both Lukasz Tinkl and Lukas Graham, the Danish singer who is not working for KDAP, unfortunately, they both match up to the K. But if I type A, then it will just be Lukas Graham, not Lukasz Tinkl, that matches simply because that the A and the A with the on top of it do not string equal each other. But that's what I'm going to fix. So let's have a look at the code. I'm implementing a combo box. A combo box is usually where you select a number of values, and this is a special purpose combo box where you can actually also type. But when you can type in combo boxes, it's usually to be able to save a new value, but not here. I just abuse, you could say, a combo box for being able to search and filter. And if you bring up the application again, what you'll notice here is that my combo box still works as a combo box, and all the other names are actually just famous names in Denmark, or the most common names for kids in Denmark in 2021. Now you know that. I don't know what you're going to use that information for, but you can see that still, if I type stuff here, it completes from that list. The combo box has a number of valid values set here, and that just comes from my main.cpp, just so that I can use the same list of names throughout all of them. That is not the important thing. And if you cut and paste, of course, you should take version 5. But if you do that and put it into your project, you'll likely adapt it slightly for how you're going to get those values. Let's go and look at the source code here of the CPP file of the combo box. So first of all, it's editable. If it wasn't, then I wouldn't be able to type in there and then could only have the drop down facility, and then, well, it wouldn't make any sense. The insert policy is no insert. That is that whenever you type something and you press enter, it doesn't get added to that list. So you cannot get employed in KDAP by just sneaking into my office, type something in that list and press enter. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. The combo box has a queue completer working with it. And the queue completer is the class that generates the items to be shown. And you could say, well, that's just the implementation. Let's not go into detail there. The completer, I get to that by calling completer, set filter mode, match contains. So if I can see, if I have my combo box, I have it here. If I type KJ, then you see that myself is actually matching here because my middle name starts with KJ. Set completion mode, it's a pop-up completion. So instead of completing it inline here, it gives me this pop-up completion, as you can see here. And finally, set case sensitive should be case insensitive. And that's it for my starting point. Behind every great combo box is a model, namely a subclass of QAbstractItem model. And that's the case here too. And if you have been following Qt Widgets and More, you'll notice that I have a fetish for models. Actually, the other day, one of my coworkers tried to offend me by saying, well, I can't use the source code of KDAP Viewer to learn about this charting engine because there are so many proxy models all over the place. I took that as a badge of honor rather than offense. But anyway, underneath the Q combo box sits a model. And a model has the ability of lots of different roles for every data item. And that's exactly the feature that the Q combo box uses for completions. There is actually the possibility with Q combo box to say, instead of using the display role, you should use another role for figuring out the completion. So whenever you try to complete by typing up in the line edit, it will use that other role to see if a given row from that model matches and therefore should be included in the list. Let's see what that looks like in the code. So the way that it works is that on my completer, I now say set completion role to be a role. And up here you can see the role is just the user role plus a random number. I guess I could just use cute user role, but I'd rather be 100% sure that I'm not stepping on my own toes in one way or the other. So I add a number to it. And then whenever I set up my data, you can see that I say add item here. That is just a regular string that you see on the screen that is added here. And then I say set item data for the last item, convert to ASCII plus slash plus value, whatever this here is, that is the string, that is the completion string to match against, because you can see that I say this is the role completion role. The convert to ASCII down here, I use a mechanism from QString named called normalized, and it would take, I actually asked inside of KDAP, can you in 5 minutes explain to me exactly what this normalized form underscore KD, what that means? And the answer was no. We can easily explain it to you, but it would take way more than 5 minutes. So let's not go down there. What this string.normalize does is that it takes the A with the apostrophe on top of it and converts that into 2 letters, so A and apostrophe. Now I remove everything that is not in regular letters, and what I get back is Lukáš Tinkl spelled out without the A apostrophe, but just with an A. It doesn't work entirely, as you can see. Miloš L, whatever you call that, doesn't translate into an L and a whatever. Neither does the A, as in Kjær, my name, translate into AE, which is how you'd usually type that on a keyboard without Danish letters. So special case these two, and if you have others, you can certainly add them yourself. And then this one here, and what I get out of the convert to ASCII method here is a relative simple, or it's a string without those special characters. And you can see that the convert to ASCII, that is Kjær with KJAER spelled like that, plus a slash and then the regular one. So if I'm sitting and need to type my own key, my own name, then I most certainly on my keyboard knows how to do that without any special characters that I need to touch or any special keys to compose. And therefore I just want to be able to spell it regularly. Otherwise it will use this ASCII-fied version of the string over here. Let's see what it looks like when I interact with it in the combo box here. I can now type Luka with the A and it'll still complete to Lukáš Tinkl, or I could type KJAER and it will complete to my name, or I could type KJAR and it would complete to my name. But notice what happens when I press arrow down here to select the item and enter. It actually says the Kjær Petersen and Jesper Kjær Petersen, so it has this ASCII version up here, which I have actually managed to live with for years now in my code. But when I started to decide that I wanted to record this here, I thought, let's figure out why does it do that? Did I just do something stupid? And it actually turned out to be a bug in Qt, but more on that a bit later. So I set out for solving this problem by working around it. First of all, I thought, let me see if I move out of the combo box. I would like it to be restored to the same value. So you can see here I type Lukáš Tinkl, and now I press tab to go to the next item, which I will most often do. I won't be sitting there looking at the combo box for a long time. I just want to move on. So that was the first thing. Let me implement a focus out event. The other problem, however, was that I also wanted to be able to type Lukáš Tinkl here and press enter for selecting the first item there and have that filled out properly. Let's just look at what it looked like up here in the previous version. Well, it didn't do anything at all. For that, I looked into my toolbox and I found two things that I could use. The first of one was a zero timer. So I'm sure that the audience of Qt Widgets and More were thinking zero timers at some point here, because it is a very useful tool, but I try to avoid zero timers as best as I can, because they always, no exception, come back and bite me in my back. So instead, I thought, let's see if an event filter can do it. So an event filter, that's a way of listening to the events of some objects. And you can see me up here, I install my event filter on the pop-up. So I found that the completer has this pop-up. So when I type over here, the pop-up that comes down here, I can access that using pop-up. I installed an event filter on it. And what I did basically was to do like this, QDebug event. And then I looked at the events being printed out. I need to include QDebug for that to be possible. We do that here. And I cannot spell include for some reason, QDebug. And I run it. And what I saw was these addresses here, which makes sense, but I was like, didn't I sometimes? Yes, I did. Here's a trick. If you learn nothing else in this episode, this will definitely save your day. If you include a specific version, so QKey event. See, I already included Q event up here, but if I include QKey event, then it will actually get the ability to print out the actual events. Awesome, right? So anyway, I printed out the events and we saw a bunch of events here now, and bring up this combo box here and I type Lou. I bring up the combo box. That's not what I do. Here, and I type, you can see lots of event coming in now, and I press enter and I look down here and I see there's a key return key press. For some reason, I never saw the key release. I guess somebody else stole that. But anyway, what I tried was, okay, that's awesome. Let's just look at if the event is the key press event, and if it's key underscore return that is being pressed. In that situation, I will update the line edit with this text here. Didn't work out because some other event came in after me. And I ended up looking at, okay, if an update request, you can see that's the last one coming in here. If an update request comes in, then I'll do it. But then it turns out there was a bunch of update requests coming around. So I checked, okay, is the completer pop-up hidden? Yes, it was. That's the only situation. And then I did that. I likely, if this was production code, I would likely have needed to write a bit of comment here telling people about this. One day I'm going to show you the code reviews for episodes of Qt Widgets and More. It might be like an Easter egg version of something, because what you notice, or what I saw when I had the review, was two people, not just one, writing, what on earth is the update request and why would it even get to a hidden combo box? That makes no sense, and yeah, it was just a workaround to try to find a solution to the problem at hand. I had this combo box, I really needed it not to show that weird text up there, and I found a way around, but sometimes that's not the right thing to do. So what is the right thing to do, you say, Jesper? Well, I should have debugged my way into Qt to find the bug and preferably even fix it, or at least found a better workaround. One of my coworkers did that when I actually filed a bug report for this. And the bug was, or the workaround was super simple. So I thought, seriously, I could have done that myself. So let me see, what would it have looked like had I done a proper debugging into Qt to see what was going on. Okay, starting the debugger is a good start, but what would I do next? Well, I need a breakpoint. And where would that be? Well, a good place would be to have a breakpoint in QLineEdit set text, because that is what the combo box must be doing at some point whenever it updates the text. Observe up here, Lukasz Tinkle. At that place, at that time, latest it should be updating the text up here. So let's see how I do that. I could find it in the source code, or I could just simply right click, add breakpoint, and instead of file name and number, I could choose function name and choose qline edit : set text. And double check, that seems right. Yes, we got 2 breakpoints. Let me continue again. Here's my, and I'll type Lukasz. I pressed arrow down, and that obviously got me to the set text. Now, looking at what was going on here. So I'll go up in my stack here now. And actually, if you don't already have that key binding, it's super worthwhile getting a key binding for moving up and down in the stack here. So I'll do that. So that was called from something, and I can see that it's a new text here is Lukasz Tingle. That's what it's setting on my qline edit. So that seems about right. How did it come to that conclusion? Now we're inside of a signal slot emission. Out here, I'm calling, here's the signal emission, I'm pretty sure. And the completion here has this text. Let's see, where did completion come from? Completion, it starts up here. Let's have a breakpoint there. Continue again. Get back to my version here. Luka, arrow down. I'm up here at my completion. Let's step here, see what's going on. It's checking stuff. Now it gets some indexes. It's getting that index, and now we're almost there. Completion is assigned to from this path from index. Let's step in here and see what's going on. If the index is valid, it seems to be. Is there a source model? Is it a DR model? Is it a file system model? No and no. Okay. Well, there we are, the no and no. And if that's the case, then go to the model itself and get the data for the index and depointer role. Okay, so there's the bug. What? The bug? Where? What? Well, it went for the role, namely the role that was specified whenever I set up the completion role. And that wasn't what it should have returned. Instead, it should have returned the display role, or as the documentation for path from index says, and it's showing here on screen now, the default implementation returns the edit role. Well, no, it didn't, but it should have. So looking at the code here, you'll notice that it's actually virtual, meaning that I can subclass this completer and override the virtual method. Much cleaner solution. Let me show you what it looks like. Subclass of QCompleter, implement a constructor where I set all those things that I set outside before, and I simply override path from index. Given the index, I return the index.data display role. Well, I could have returned the edit role to be, it wouldn't have changed anything, but then it would at least have been exactly what the documentation says. I need to instantiate this new completer, which I do down here. I create a new instance of my completer. I specify the model from the combo box itself as the model a completer uses. And then I call setCompleter with my new completer. And that's it. It does have one bug though. Well, I don't know if it's a bug, but it has one shortcoming. Let me show you that. Over here, if I type Luka, and yeah, that Lukasz, I can press arrow down and enter to specify that this is the one. You can see printing out here down that he got activated, but I would just like to be able to press enter here. It made the list go away, but well, and even worse, I can type, I don't know, there we are. Which Luka is, I don't know. So that's step number 5 coming right up. Before I show you the final piece of code, I challenge you to think about how would you solve that problem. Namely, that you could type in invalid characters in the combo box. Press pause now. I'm waiting. Still waiting. Okay. The solution, of course, is a validator. That's the whole purpose of a validator, namely to work together with a line edit or a combo box's line edit and allow or disallow characters. So it works like this. You type something in the line edit before it actually shows up on the screen. The line edit will ask the validator, is it okay to add this item here? And the validator will say, yeah, that's fine, or no, that makes absolutely no sense. Do not even show it on the screen. And the code, like this. So what we see now is a subclass from QValidator. It implements one method, namely validate. Validate must return one of three things. Either it's not okay, that is the QValidator invalid, or it is okay, meaning that yes, this is a perfect okay string, or it's intermediate, meaning if you do a bit more to this string, then it'll be okay. I don't need the is okay, and actually to be able to emit that, I would need to run through the whole list every time. So I shortcut that a bit. In intermediate is okay for me to return in any case, because the QCombo box will take care of the emitting the signal anyway. Let's look at it. I am creating a string matcher with the string that I'm searching for, and it's case insensitive. Then I'm iterating through all of the rows of my model, and for each of those I go and ask for an index for the zeros column at that row, and I look for the completion row and convert that to a string, and now I check whether my matcher, what the index of that string is. So basically I'm searching for KJ, and is there anywhere in this current row here where it says KJ? And yes, there is, and therefore it returns index number 8, and that's different from -1, which will return if there is no match. If that's the case, then it will return intermediate, and that's how I now can type KJ and it'll match KJ, but I cannot type Y or U, or the only letter is an A or the A, which would be okay too. That's the first part of it. The other part of the solution here is actually, and first of all, I need to instantiate my validator, which I do here, set validator on my model here, or on my combo box. The other part, what that's going on right here, is actually another problem that I had, namely, if I type yes and I press enter here, what I would like it to happen is that it will go and fill out the first item in that list. And you can see up here, if I type yes and type enter, it will just say yes and nothing else. For that, I have an event filter installed on the item. This time I can fortunately just listen for the hide event, and I'll go and check whether, no, this was not the situation. Well, it could have been the situation that actually I had the complete text up there. If that's the case, then I'll just let the event filter work its magic. Otherwise, I'll go and ask for the completer's current index. So not the pop-up's current index, but the completer's current index. And that's what will then be fetched from here, the set underlined it, and the text activity being emitted. The last part took a bit of fiddling around, I admit that, but I thought it was worthwhile to get that tiny little detail working too, so that I now have a QCombo box that I can use wherever I need to specify employees with these characters in them, and it just works. I really love this combo box here. I use that at a number of different places in KWR, and I urge you to go and cut and paste it out for all those places where you have non-Latin 1 characters that you want to complete or search from. That's it for this episode of Qt Widgets and More. If you tried replicating, by the way, the steps in the debugger that I did, you might have noticed that your version jumped weirdly around. And that is likely because that you are using the SDK version instead of your own compiled Qt. The SDK version of Qt is built in release mode, and therefore the order of the lines might be very different. There's an episode on how to compile your own Qt version that you might want to follow up with. And until next time, have a great time.
Would you like to improve your programming skills? Then have a look at our highly rated training courses on kdab.com.